Picture standing in the middle of a vast, sun-baked desert, where the air shimmers with heat and the ground beneath your feet holds secrets older than time itself. This is Jericho, not just a city, but a living puzzle, a place where every layer of earth whispers stories from thousands of years ago. Think about that for a moment. One of the oldest cities on earth, a place where people have walked, lived, and worshipped for over 10,000 years. And buried deep within its ancient soil, archaeologists have uncovered something extraordinary: 30 ritual objects, each one a silent witness to the spiritual lives of people who walked these very streets long before history books were even written. What makes these discoveries so breathtaking isn't just their age, though that alone is staggering. It's the intimate connection they give us to the past. Imagine holding a carved stone figure, its edges smoothed by centuries of touch, and realizing the hands that last held it belonged to someone who lived and breathed in a world so different from ours, yet driven by the same hopes, fears, and dreams. These objects aren't just artifacts, they're bridges across time, offering glimpses into ceremonies, beliefs, and daily rituals that shaped one of humanity's first great cities. And here's the thing: Jericho isn't just another archaeological site. It's a place woven into the fabric of history, a city so resilient it's been destroyed and rebuilt more times than we can count, yet it still stands. When we dig into its past, we're not just uncovering ancient tools or pottery. We're piecing together the spiritual heartbeat of a civilization that thrived when most of the world was still untamed wilderness. So today, we're going to journey together into the heart of this mystery, exploring these 30 ritual objects one by one and uncovering the secrets they've guarded for millennia. Trust me, what we're about to discover will change the way you see this ancient city forever. Among the most haunting and fascinating discoveries in ancient Jericho are the plastered skulls, carefully preserved human remains that blur the line between the living and the dead. Picture this: a skull once buried beneath the earth, meticulously coated with layers of clay, its hollow eye sockets filled with shells to mimic the spark of life, its features painstakingly reshaped to resemble a living face. These weren't just bones, they were portraits crafted with such care that even after 9,000 years, they still stare back at us with an unsettling presence. This practice dates back to the Neolithic period, a time when Jericho was transitioning from a simple settlement into one of the world's first great cities. But why go to such lengths? Archaeologists believe these skulls played a central role in ancestor worship, a way for the living to keep their departed close, not just in memory but in physical form. Imagine a household where the face of a revered elder, carefully reconstructed, watched over the family, offering protection or wisdom from beyond the grave. Some theories suggest they might have been displayed during rituals, even passed down through generations as sacred heirlooms. What's truly remarkable is the craftsmanship. The plaster wasn't just slapped on, it was sculpted with precision, often painted with ochre to mimic skin tone, and sometimes even adorned with hair or headdresses. These weren't generic representations, they were individualized, as if the creators sought to capture the essence of the person they once were. And here's something chilling: many of these skulls show signs of being handled long after their creation, their surfaces worn smooth from touch, hinting at repeated use in ceremonies over decades or even centuries. But the mystery deepens when we consider where they were found. Some were buried beneath homes, as if anchoring the spirits of ancestors to the very foundations of daily life. Others were grouped together, almost like a gallery of the honored dead. Were they mediators between the living and the divine, symbols of continuity in a world where survival was never guaranteed? Whatever their purpose, these plastered skulls offer a rare and intimate glimpse into the spiritual world of Neolithic Jericho, a place where death wasn't an end but a transformation, and where the past was never truly buried. The plastered skulls of Jericho weren't just eerie artifacts, they were masterpieces of their time, crafted with materials that reveal a profound understanding of both art and spirituality. The plaster itself was a carefully mixed blend of lime and local clay, sometimes infused with crushed limestone or sand to create a durable, almost sculptural medium. But what's astonishing is the attention to detail. Layers were applied thinly, smoothed by hand, and often painted with natural pigments like red ochre, mimicking the warmth of living flesh. Shells inserted into the eye sockets weren't just placeholders, they were chosen for their pearlescent sheen, catching the light to give the illusion of vitality, as if the dead could still see. This level of craftsmanship suggests more than ritual. It hints at a sacred artistry, a tradition passed down through generations. Compare these skulls to similar finds in places like Ain Ghazal in Jordan or Tel Ramad in Syria, and you'll notice striking parallels: shared techniques, materials, even the practice of modeling individual features like noses and cheekbones. But Jericho's skulls stand out for their sheer realism. Some even show traces of bitumen, a tar-like substance used to sculpt hair or eyebrows, a detail so intimate it feels like meeting the person behind the plaster. Why go to such lengths? One theory points to the Neolithic belief that the head housed the essence of a person's spirit. By preserving the face, the community might have believed they were preserving the soul itself, creating a physical anchor for memory and power. Another possibility ties to Jericho's role as an early agricultural hub. Ancestors, venerated through these skulls, could have been seen as guardians of fertility and harvest, their watchful eyes ensuring prosperity. The cultural weight of these objects becomes even clearer when we consider their setting. Unlike later burial practices that hid the dead away, these skulls were kept close beneath floors, near hearths, or in communal spaces. They weren't relics tucked in tombs, they were active participants in daily life, their presence a bridge between worlds, and that's what makes them so extraordinary. In a time before writing, before empires, these people found a way to speak across millennia, their hands shaping not just plaster but the very idea of eternity. Moving from the solemnity of plastered skulls to the vitality of animal figurines, Jericho's ritual objects reveal a society deeply intertwined with the natural world. Among the most captivating finds are small clay animals, some no larger than a child's palm, crafted with such lifelike detail that you can almost feel the energy pulsing through them. Bulls with arched necks, goats mid-leap, even coiled snakes seem frozen in motion, their forms shaped by hands that knew these creatures intimately. These weren't mere toys or decorations. In an agrarian community like Jericho, where survival depended on successful harvests and thriving herds, animals held sacred significance. Take the bull figurines, for instance. Their massive shoulders and sweeping horns exude raw power. To the people of Jericho, bulls likely symbolized strength and fertility, perhaps invoked in rituals to ensure healthy livestock or abundant crops. Some figurines bear traces of ochre paint, suggesting they were used in ceremonies where color itself held magical meaning. Then there are the goats, their dynamic poses capturing the agility of creatures that climbed the rocky hills surrounding Jericho. Goats played a dual role, providing milk and meat, but also acting as intermediaries between the earthly and the divine in many ancient Near Eastern cultures. A broken figurine found near a granary, its legs carefully repaired with bitumen, hints at repeated ritual use, as if its presence alone could guard the community's food stores. But perhaps most intriguing are the predator figurines, lions or wolves, though time has blurred their exact identities. These might have served as hunting talismans, their forms charged with the hope of a successful chase or protection against threats. One particularly striking piece shows a predator mid-pounce, its jaws open in a silent snarl. Was this an offering to a deity of the hunt, a charm to ward off actual predators? The context of these discoveries tells its own story. Many figurines were found in household shrines or buried at thresholds, places where the spiritual and daily life intersected. Unlike the communal display of plastered skulls, these objects feel personal tokens of private devotion, held in calloused hands during whispered prayers for rain, for protection, for life itself. And that's what makes them so powerful. In their simplicity, they capture the universal human urge to seek control over the uncontrollable, to mold hope into something tangible. Among the quiet corners of ancient Jericho's homes, another ritual object whispers of daily devotion. The unassuming stone altars, no larger than a bread loaf, yet heavy with meaning. These weren't grand monuments in temples, but intimate fixtures nestled in domestic spaces, where families likely gathered to make offerings to unseen forces. Picture a clay-lined hearth, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs, a small stone slab at its center darkened by generations of flame. These altars tell a story not of priests and kings, but of mothers, farmers, and craftsmen seeking solace or favor in their own four walls. Forensic archaeology reveals tantalizing clues. Many altars bear telltale scorch marks, their surfaces pitted from repeated exposure to fire. Residue analysis has detected traces of charred grains, olive oil, and even myrrh, evidence of offerings that might have ranged from simple meals to precious incense. One particularly revealing find showed layers of ash interwoven with fig seeds, suggesting seasonal rituals tied to harvests. Another still had the faint imprint of a clay vessel pressed into its surface, as if a bowl of offerings had been placed there and forgotten for millennia. The placement of these altars speaks volumes. Some were embedded into the floors of kitchens, their presence blending the act of cooking with sacred ceremony. Others stood near doorways, perhaps as guardians against misfortune. A few were even found in courtyards, positioned to catch the first or last light of day, a deliberate alignment with the rhythms of the sun. What's striking is their uniformity. Despite being handmade, their proportions often match across different households, hinting at shared ritual knowledge passed down through families. But who were they praying to? Unlike later civilizations with named deities, Neolithic Jericho's spiritual world remains elusive. These altars might have been dedicated to ancestral spirits, forces of nature, or household guardians. The absence of inscriptions forces us to read between the lines. The careful wear patterns showing where hands rubbed the stone smooth in reverence, the way some altars were repaired with plaster, as if their power couldn't be abandoned even when cracked. Consider one altar discovered beneath the foundation of a rebuilt home, intentionally buried when the walls rose anew. Was this a ritual to protect the household? A way to carry blessings forward, these stones, silent and stubborn, refused to give up all their secrets. Yet in their scorch marks and oil stains, we catch echoes of whispered prayers, the universal human need to reach beyond what the hands can hold, to touch something greater with smoke and sacrifice. Now let's turn to a discovery that seems to leap straight out of a Neolithic theater: the fragmentary ceramic masks of Jericho. These fragile, enigmatic faces, some no larger than a palm, once adorned the living rather than the dead. Unlike the plastered skulls crafted for ancestors, these masks were made to be worn, their edges still bearing the faint marks of cords that once held them in place. Imagine the scene: flickering firelight, rhythmic chanting, and a figure stepping forward with a face not wholly human, perhaps embodying a spirit or retelling a myth older than the city itself. What survives today are mostly broken pieces, a pronounced nose here, a stylized mouth there, but when reconstructed, they reveal striking features. Wide, hollow eyes that seem to stare through time, exaggerated cheekbones, and mouths slightly parted as if caught mid-speech. The artistry is deliberate, almost theatrical. Some were painted with bold geometric patterns, zigzags, or dots that may have symbolized specific roles or identities. One nearly complete mask discovered near a communal oven has a flattened, almost owl-like visage, its surface scored with lines mimicking feathers. Another, found buried with a cluster of goat horns, bears a striking resemblance to known storm god depictions from later Levantine cultures. These masks didn't exist in isolation. Similar artifacts have been unearthed across the Levant, from the haunting stone masks of Nahul in Israel to the painted clay faces of Ain Ghazal. What ties them together is their likely role in ritual performances. In Jericho's case, their fragmentary state suggests deliberate breakage, perhaps as part of ceremonial deaths after use. Some were even buried near water channels, a practice seen in other early agricultural societies where masks were thought to hold life-giving or apotropaic power. But who or what did they represent? The mask's exaggerated features lean toward the otherworldly, deities, spirits, or even mythical ancestors invoked for protection or fertility. Their discovery near food storage areas hints at possible harvest rituals where wearers might have personified forces of nature. Alternatively, they could have been used in coming-of-age ceremonies or communal storytelling, a tactile way to pass down collective memory. What's undeniable is their emotional resonance. Hold one of these fragments and you're holding the ghost of a performance, the echo of laughter, gasps, or solemn silence from an audience long turned to dust. In these fragile shards, we see the birth of theater, religion, and art intertwining, a testament to humanity's timeless urge to step outside ourselves and become something greater, if only for a night. Now picture this rising from the ashes of ancient Jericho's ritual spaces. Ceramic towers no taller than a forearm, their perforated walls swirling with aromatic smoke. These aren't just incense burners, they're miniature monuments, their tiered designs echoing the very architecture of the city itself. Discovered clustered near gateways and communal gathering spots, these ornate objects bridge the physical and spiritual realms, their fumes once carrying prayers upward like invisible threads. Take one particularly well-preserved example, its surface weathered but still bearing the imprint of careful hands. 3 distinct tiers taper toward the top, each level punctuated with precisely placed holes, not random punctures, but deliberate apertures designed to control the release of smoke. The base mimics Jericho's famed mud brick construction, complete with etched mortar lines between imagined bricks. It's uncanny, a handheld version of the city's own towers, as if someone had shrunk a piece of the skyline and repurposed it for sacred use. But why this architectural homage? Archaeology offers clues. Residue analyses reveal traces of juniper, myrrh, and terebinth resin, substances known across ancient Near Eastern cultures for purification properties. The tower shape might have symbolized a conduit between earth and heavens, the smoke ascending like a ladder for divine communication. Some scholars suggest these burners played roles in rites of passage, their cleansing fumes marking transitions, births, marriages, or even the consecration of new homes. A broken burner found beneath a rebuilt threshold hints at this, its fragments perhaps ritually retired when the space it sanctified was renewed. The social dimension is equally fascinating. Unlike household altars, these burners appear in shared spaces, implying communal rituals. Imagine a gathering at Jericho's gates, where the scent of burning resins would have mingled with the dust of arriving traders, the smoke both a spiritual and practical sanitizer in a bustling urban center. Their designs even vary by neighborhood, some simpler, others adorned with red-painted zigzags reminiscent of city walls, suggesting different lineages or trades might have had their own ritual variations. What lingers most powerfully is the intimacy of their craftsmanship. Fingerprints pressed into the clay remain visible, immortalizing the hands that shaped them. One burner's interior still holds a carbonized lump of resin, abandoned mid-burning, as if the last user left in haste, or perhaps because the ritual required its incomplete consumption. These details transform abstract theories into tangible humanity, reminding us that every wisp of smoke carried someone's hopes, fears, or gratitude, rising from a city already ancient when the pyramids were still blueprints in the sand. Hidden among Jericho's ruins, coiled and waiting, lie bronze serpent figurines, some no longer than a finger, others stretching the length of a forearm, each one wrought with such lifelike precision that you half expect them to slither away into the shadows. These aren't mere decorations, they're pulsing with symbolism, artifacts that whisper of ancient healing rites and divine protection. Picture the glint of firelight dancing across their scaled surfaces as they rested in the palms of priests or petitioners, their sinuous forms embodying a power both feared and revered. The connection to healing cults is unmistakable. Across the ancient Near East, serpents were dual symbols representing danger and death, yes, but also renewal and healing, their ability to shed skin making them natural emblems of transformation. In Jericho, several serpent figurines were found near a spring-fed pool, a place where water, the universal healer, would have drawn those seeking cures. One particularly striking piece bears traces of a herbal residue in its hollow interior, suggesting it might have been used to hold medicinal ointments or offerings. Another, discovered beneath the threshold of a house, shows where patterns indicating it was repeatedly touched, perhaps rubbed by inhabitants seeking protection as they crossed into their home. Now here's where the story twists. These artifacts bear a startling resemblance to the biblical Nehushtan, the bronze serpent Moses fashioned in the wilderness, later adopted as a sacred object in Jerusalem's temple. The parallels are uncanny. Both are bronze, both are linked to healing, and both occupy that ambiguous space between idol and icon. This isn't coincidence, it's evidence of a shared symbolic language across cultures. In Ugaritic texts, the serpent god Horon wards off chaos. In Mesopotamia, the god Ningishida takes serpentine form as a guardian of thresholds. Jericho's serpents likely served similar roles, mediators between the earthly and divine, their metal bodies charged with apotropaic power. Yet what makes Jericho's serpents unique is their intimacy. Unlike temple monuments, these are small enough to hold, personal enough to carry. One figurine, its body engraved with tiny undulating lines resembling water, might have been a votive offering for safe childbirth. Another, found curled around a clay lamp, could symbolize the perpetual cycle of light and darkness. And then there's the haunting detail of their eyes, many inlaid with bits of obsidian or shell, giving them a piercing gaze that seems to follow you across millennia. Were they talismans against illness? Guardians of sacred spaces? Or perhaps mediators in rituals where the line between poison and cure was as thin as a serpent's spine? Whatever their purpose, these bronzed coils remind us that in Jericho, even the most feared creatures could become vessels of hope. Their flickering forms a testament to humanity's enduring quest to tame the untamable, to find salvation in the very things that might destroy us. From the shadows of Jericho's homes emerge clay goddess figurines, curvaceous, commanding, and pulsing with a quiet power that transcends millennia. These aren't delicate trinkets, they're robust, earthy sculptures, their exaggerated hips and breasts carved with purposeful boldness, their faces often left blank or abstract, as if the essence of divinity couldn't be confined to human features. Picture holding one in your palm, the weight of the clay, the thumbprints of its maker still visible along the curves, a tactile connection to a time when the sacred was as close as the hearth fire. The link to fertility goddesses like Asherah is unmistakable. Across the ancient Near East, similar figurines appear in domestic spaces, often with hands supporting their breasts, a gesture both nurturing and symbolic of abundance. But here's where the debate ignites. Were these objects personal talismans for private devotion, or did they play a role in larger temple rituals? The evidence tilts intriguingly both ways. Many figurines were found tucked into home shrines, nestled beside grain storage jars or beneath sleeping mats, suggesting intimate, daily worship. One particularly worn specimen, its surface polished smooth from countless touches, was discovered beneath the floor of a birthing room, its presence whispering of prayers for safe childbirth or healthy children. Yet other clues point to communal veneration. a cluster of nearly identical figurines, all bearing traces of red ochre pigment, emerged near what archaeologists believe was a public ritual space, a raised platform with evidence of repetitive offerings. Their uniformity hints at mass production, perhaps for seasonal festivals honoring a mother goddess associated with agricultural cycles. Even more compelling is a broken figurine found deliberately placed in the foundations of Jericho's earliest defensive wall, as if blessing the city's very boundaries. The duality of these objects, both personal and collective, reflects the layered spirituality of Jericho's people. Consider the materials: locally sourced clay, mixed with crushed bone or straw for durability, then fired in the same kilns used for cooking pots. This wasn't elite artistry, it was folk religion, accessible and immediate. Some figurines show signs of repair, their cracks filled with plaster, proving they weren't disposable but cherished across generations. But the most haunting question remains: who interacted with them? The absence of male divine figurines in domestic settings suggests these goddesses held unique sway over daily life, guardians of childbirth, healers of illness, perhaps even mediators in family disputes. Their facelessness only deepens the mystery. Without individualized features, they could be any woman, or every woman, blurring the line between mortal and divine in a way that feels both ancient and strikingly modern. What lingers isn't just the artistry, but the quiet urgency of their purpose. In a world where survival hinged on the fertility of both land and body, these clay figures weren't mere symbols. They were conduits of hope, shaped by hands that understood the precariousness of life. To hold one today is to touch not just an artifact, but a heartbeat steady, insistent, and echoing across 8,000 years. Buried beneath layers of Jericho's ancient soil, flint knives emerge, their edges so sharp they could still draw blood today, yet their blades bear marks that speak not of battle but of sacred rites. These aren't weapons, they're instruments of ritual, each serration and curve meticulously crafted for ceremonies that bridge the human and the divine. Picture holding one, the cool weight of the stone, the way light catches its translucent edge, the faint stains along the haft where hands once gripped it in moments of profound significance. What sets these knives apart is their paradoxical condition, centuries old, yet untouched by the wear of daily use. Forensic analysis reveals something extraordinary. The blades show no signs of butchering animals or cutting rope. Instead, there where patterns suggest repetitive, precise motions, shallow, controlled cuts made with deliberate care. One particularly striking example, discovered near an altar-like structure, retains traces of organic residue identified as animal fat mixed with ochre pigment. This isn't accidental, it's evidence of ritual anointing, perhaps a sacrifice where blood and sacred dye mingled. But here's where the mystery deepens. Some knives were found bundled in linen alongside infant remains, their presence hinting at birth or initiation rites. Circumcision is a compelling theory. Flint's unparalleled sharpness made it ideal for such delicate procedures well into the Bronze Age. A cluster of these knives, all buried beneath the threshold of a dwelling, might have symbolized a family's covenant with protective spirits. Yet others bear traces of plant resins, suggesting roles in harvesting medicinal herbs or sanctifying offerings. The craftsmanship is revelatory. These blades weren't merely functional, they were artworks. Some feature veins of colored stone deliberately aligned to mimic flowing water or lightning, natural forces imbued with spiritual power. One knife's handle, carved to resemble a coiled serpent, echoes Jericho's veneration of creatures that straddled worlds. And then there's the placement. Many were interred upright, blades pointing skyward, as if their final act was to channel prayers from earth to heavens. Were they tools of priests, talismans for rites of passage? The answer may lie in their silence, the absence of nicks or scratches that would betray mundane use. These knives were reserved for moments when the veil between worlds grew thin, their edges not meant to sever flesh but to open doors. To hold one now is to grasp a paradox, an object forged for ephemeral acts, yet enduring as the stones that birthed it, its purpose still cutting through time. Among the most intimate relics of Jericho's spiritual life are the libation vessels, small, spouted containers that once held offerings of wine, oil, or honey, their delicate curves designed to pour liquid gifts into the earth or onto altars with ritual precision. These aren't just pottery, they're conduits, each spout a bridge between human hands and the unseen. Picture the moment, a priest or perhaps a family elder tipping one of these vessels, the dark stain of olive oil or the faint sweetness of fermented fruit cascading onto stones warmed by fire, the act itself a whispered conversation with the divine. What makes these vessels extraordinary is their tactile connection to daily life. Unlike grand temple artifacts, many show signs of repair, cracks carefully sealed with bitumen, handles reinforced with extra clay, proof they were used repeatedly, cherished across generations. Residue analyses tell a vivid story. One spout bore traces of myrrh-infused wine, another the unmistakable imprint of fig-scented oil. These weren't generic offerings, they were tailored, the scents and substances chosen with purpose. A vessel found near a burial site still held a dried trickle of pomegranate wine, its tartness likely symbolizing life's cyclical nature in death rituals. The spouts themselves are masterpieces of ergonomic design, some slender as reeds for controlled droplet-by-droplet offerings, others wider to release a steady stream during communal ceremonies. One particularly elegant example curves like a bird's beak, its tip carved to mimic the ibis, a creature linked to Thoth in later Egyptian traditions. Was this coincidence or evidence of early cross-cultural exchange? The answer lingers in the clay, but the true power of these vessels lies in their universality. From the poorest homes to grander spaces, their forms vary, rough-hewn or finely polished, yet their purpose unites them. A child's handprint pressed into one vessel's base suggests even the young participated, pouring offerings to household spirits. Another, found beneath a granary's foundation, contained a single barley grain glued to its interior with resin, a humble yet profound sacrifice for abundance. Libations weren't merely symbolic, they were sensory experiences. The glug of liquid, the sheen of oil catching firelight, the aroma of wine rising like an invisible thread, these were moments where the mundane met the mystical. To hold one now is to feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers, the echoes of a people who believed the divine thirsted just as they did, and that the act of pouring could knit the worlds together. Carved from the ribs and vertebrae of animals that once roamed Jericho's hinterlands, bone amulets emerge from the dust as intimate companions to the city's ancient inhabitants. These palm-sized relics, polished smooth by centuries of touch, bear intricate engraving spirals that mimic whirlwinds, zigzags mirroring lightning, and stylized eyes staring blankly from the porous surface. Each groove and notch was carved with flint tools finer than needles, the hands that made them guided by traditions whispering of protection against forces unseen. Where patterns tell the most compelling stories, some amulets are thinned at the edges, their surfaces glossy from constant friction against clothing or skin, likely suspended from cords around necks or wrists as daily guardians. One, discovered clutched in the skeletal hand of a child burial, had a hole worn through its center from years of nervous twisting, a tactile comfort against childhood fears. Another, found near a doorway, bears grooves along its edges where leather ties once anchored it above a threshold, warding off ill fortune before it could cross into the home. The choice of bone as a medium is no accident. In a society where every part of a slaughtered animal held value, repurposing bones imbued them with a second life, transforming the mundane into the sacred. Rib bones, with their natural curvature, were favored for amulets meant to be cupped in the palm, their shape conforming to the hand's grip. Vertebrae, with their hollow centers, sometimes held tiny bundles of herbs or resin, carbonized traces of which still linger in their crevices. One particularly haunting example, carved from a gazelle's metapodial bone, depicts a swarm of bees, a symbol scholars link to both fertility and the soul's journey, their wings etched in such detail they seem to vibrate. But who wore them? The distribution offers clues. Many amulets cluster in residential quarters rather than temples, suggesting personal rather than priestly use. A group found near a potter's workshop all bear kiln symbols, crosshatched lines resembling stacked bricks, hinting at craft-specific talismans against accidents or failed firings. Others, unearthed near the city's springs, feature wave motifs, their surfaces pitted from exposure to mineral-rich waters, as if dipped repeatedly to amplify their power. The most enigmatic amulet of all shows no figurative carving at all. Instead, it's incised with a single line that spirals inward endlessly, a labyrinth with no exit. Microscopic analysis revealed traces of red ochre packed into its grooves, perhaps renewed annually in a private ritual. Was it a map of the underworld? A charm against getting lost physically or spiritually? The bone refuses to say, but its very silence speaks volumes about the mysteries Jericho's people carried close to their hearts, literally and figuratively, until the earth reclaimed them. Rising like silent sentinels from Jericho's ancient soil, the stone pillars, or massiboth, stand in deliberate alignment, their weathered surfaces bearing witness to ceremonies long forgotten. Unlike the portable ritual objects we've explored, these monolithic presences are rooted in place, their permanence a stark contrast to the transient lives of those who revered them. Picture the scene: a row of rough-hewn stones, some taller than a person, casting elongated shadows at dusk as priests or elders move between them, their fingertips brushing against surfaces pitted by wind and ritual touch. These aren't mere architectural features, they're deliberate markers, their placement revealing a sophisticated understanding of sacred geometry. One cluster, excavated near what was likely a ceremonial plaza, forms a perfect equilateral triangle with the city's oldest spring, alignment too precise to be accidental. Another group frames the sunrise during the autumn equinox, their shadows converging at a central altar-like slab. The stones themselves vary in material. Local limestone dominates, but a few are crafted from basalt imported from miles away, their darker hue setting them apart as perhaps holding special significance. Debate swirls around their purpose. Some scholars argue these pillars served as covenant markers, physical embodiments of agreements between families, tribes, or even humans and the divine. One stone, etched with a faint handprint symbol, was found near a burial site cradling a cache of carved knuckle bones, possible evidence of oath-swearing rituals. Others link them to ancestor veneration, noting how later Bronze Age text from the region described standing stones as houses of the dead, where spirits could manifest. But the celestial connection is undeniable. Several pillars bear cup marks small, carved depressions that may have held offerings or served as primitive astronomical tools. During certain lunar phases, moonlight strikes these cups at angles that illuminate adjacent carvings of crescent shapes. It's a phenomenon that would have been invisible in daylight, suggesting rituals timed to the night sky. The most haunting detail lies in the wear patterns. Unlike the smoothed surfaces of household altars, these stones show erosion concentrated at specific heights, waist level for some, shoulder height for others, as if generations of participants reached out to touch them in the same exact spot during ceremonies. One pillar, broken in antiquity, was carefully propped upright with smaller stones wedged beneath it, a testament to the reverence these objects commanded even after damage. Were they boundary markers between sacred and profane spaces, anchors for seasonal festivals, or perhaps physical manifestations of deities too immense to be confined to figurines? The pillars refuse to yield easy answers, yet their very endurance speaks volumes in a city rebuilt countless times. These stones remained unmoved, their silent watch persisting through earthquakes, conquests, and the slow turning of millennia. To stand beside them today is to feel the weight of their mystery, a presence that transcends the sum of their carved surfaces. From the shadows of Jericho's ruins comes a sound, not the echo of footsteps or the whisper of wind, but something deliberate, rhythmic, almost alive. Hollow clay spheres, no larger than a fist, rattle with the movement of pebbles sealed inside for millennia. These aren't children's toys, they're instruments of ritual, their purposeful construction revealing a world where sound itself held power. Hold one now, and the pebbles within shift like distant thunder, a noise crafted to bridge the human and the divine. The craftsmanship is ingenious. Each rattle was fired with an opening left unsealed, allowing tiny stones or dried seeds to be placed inside before the final glaze locked them in forever. Some bear finger grooves, worn smooth from repeated use, their surfaces painted with zigzags or dots that may have symbolized sound waves or protective symbols. One particularly elaborate specimen, found near a burial site, contains not pebbles but carved bone beads, each click against the clay walls producing a sharper, more deliberate tone. Archaeologists suspect these were used in funeral rites, their sound guiding spirits or marking transitions between worlds, but the true magic lies in reconstructing their auditory role. Using 3D modeling, researchers have recreated the rattle's acoustics, revealing how their shapes amplify certain frequencies. The rounder ones produce deep, resonant tones, perhaps used to mimic earth tremors or the growl of distant storms. Flattened varieties create sharper, quicker bursts of noise, ideal for rhythmic ceremonies or drowning out unwanted sounds believed to carry ill intent. A cluster of rattles discovered near a gateway, all tuned to dissonant pitches, suggests they might have been shaken in unison to shatter malevolent forces before they entered the city. The ceremonial context deepens when we consider where they were found. Many appear in spaces associated with healing near springs, in rooms with evidence of herbal preparations, or alongside figurines of protective deities. One rattle, still cradled in the skeletal hands of an elderly woman, contained traces of lavender and sage, its scent released faintly with each movement. Was this a healer's tool, a charm against fever or restless spirits? The answer may lie in ethnographic parallels. Modern Near Eastern traditions still use similar noisemakers to scare off illness-bearing jinn, a practice possibly rooted in these ancient prototypes. Yet the most poignant detail is the wear. Some rattles show patches where the clay was rubbed thin, not from play, but from years of ritual repetition, a mother's nightly shaking to safeguard her children, a priest's steady rhythm during solstice rites. Others bear tiny repair marks, their cracks sealed with resin as if their sound couldn't be lost. To hold one now is to grasp an ancient understanding. That noise could shape reality, that the right rhythm might keep darkness at bay, and that even the smallest pebble rolling in a handmade chamber could echo across 8,000 years. Beneath the dust of Jericho's most sacred spaces, fragments of luminous mother-of-pearl shell glint like captured moonlight, their iridescent surfaces still whispering of their former glory. These shell inlays, painstakingly shaped into geometric patterns, celestial symbols, and even stylized waves, once adorned ritual furniture, their shimmer transforming ordinary surfaces into portals of divine radiance. Picture a ceremonial bench or altar, its wooden frame long crumbled to dust, but these shell pieces surviving as ghostly echoes of a time when craftsmanship and spirituality were inseparable. The choice of material is no accident. Sourced from the distant Mediterranean or Red Sea, these shells were rare treasures, their journey to Jericho likely woven with trade and ritual significance. Their natural luminescence, shifting between milky white and watery blue depending on the light, would have seemed supernatural to ancient eyes. Archaeologists found some inlays arranged in spiral motifs, a near-universal symbol for water, eternity, or the cyclical nature of existence, while others formed star clusters mirroring the night sky over Jericho. One particularly striking discovery revealed a crescent moon pattern inlaid on what might have been a shrine's canopy. its curves catching the dawn light during specific lunar phases. But here's what's fascinating. These weren't just decorative. Microscopic analysis shows where patterns suggesting repeated anointing with oils, their surfaces absorbing resins that deepened their luster over time. Some fragments retain traces of bitumen adhesive mixed with crushed lapis lazuli, an imported stone associated with the heavens, as if the very glue holding them in place was charged with meaning. The inlays' placement is equally telling. They cluster in spaces associated with communal rituals, near raised platforms that may have held statues of deities, or framing doorways where their reflective surfaces could catch torchlight, transforming dim interiors into shimmering otherworlds. The symbolic weight of water is undeniable. In a city where springs meant survival, Shell's creatures born of the sea became metaphors for life's origins. A set of inlays arranged in undulating lines on a ritual basin's rim suggests flowing rivers, while others, carved into fish shapes, were found near water channels. Yet their brilliance also tied them to celestial realms. Later texts from Ugarit describe goddesses adorned with sea stone, linking aquatic and astral realms. Jericho's artisans may have shared this vision, using shell inlays to dissolve boundaries between earth and sky, mortal and divine. What lingers most is the tactile intimacy of these objects. Unlike monolithic statues or towering pillars, these inlays were meant to be touched, their cool, smooth surfaces inviting fingertips to trace their edges during prayer or meditation. One fragment, no larger than a thumbnail, bears the faint imprint of a child's tooth mark, a fleeting moment of wonder or devotion preserved in pearl. To hold these pieces now is to grasp a paradox, fragile as eggshell, yet enduring as the beliefs they embodied, their light undimmed by the 8,000 years between their maker's hands and ours. The horned altars of Jericho rise from the earth like silent witnesses to ceremonies both sacred and stark, their most striking feature being the 4 upward curving projections at each corner, resembling the horns of a wild bull. These stone altars, some waist high and others no larger than a stool, carry an undeniable aura of power. Touch one today, and your fingers might trace the same grooves where blood once pooled, channeled by shallow gutters carved into the surface, their purpose as undeniable as it is unsettling. Biblical parallels leap to mind. Centuries after Jericho's altars were last used, the Hebrew Bible would describe nearly identical structures in the tabernacle and temple, complete with horns at the corners. According to Leviticus, these horns were dabbed with blood during purification rites, and gripping them granted asylum seekers temporary sanctuary. But Jericho's altars predate those texts by millennia, suggesting a shared ritual language across the ancient Near East. One particularly well-preserved example still bears darkened stains that biochemical analysis identified as oxidized iron, likely from sacrificial animals. The horns themselves show polishing from repeated contact, their smoothed surfaces hinting at priests or worshippers anointing them with oil or blood in a cyclical act of renewal. But the altar's functions were likely more nuanced than mere slaughter. A cluster discovered near Jericho's western gate had no blood residue at all. Instead, their surfaces were pitted from burning grains and herbs, suggesting offerings of incense or harvest fruits. Another, found broken and carefully buried beneath a courtyard, held remnants of seashells and blue pigment, possible tokens of water rituals in this desert city where springs meant survival. The horns here might have symbolized divine protection, their upward sweep echoing the posture of charging bulls, creatures long associated with strength and fertility in the region. The most haunting discovery came from an altar unearthed near a perimeter wall. Nestled between its horns was a terracotta figurine of a woman clutching her abdomen, her face tilted skyward. Surrounding the base were animal knuckle bones, each marked with a single groove, a counting system, perhaps tallying vows or recorded blessings. This altar wasn't just a tool of ritual, it was a nexus of hope where the physical and spiritual worlds intertwined. To stand before one now is to confront a paradox: the horns, so imposing, yet the altars themselves often small enough to touch. This intimacy suggests a theology where the divine was approachable, where every household might have poured libations or sought solace at a horned corner. The stones don't speak, but their stains, their wear, their very posture whisper of a people trying to bridge the gap between earth and heaven with smoke, with blood, with hands pressed against stone horns that pointed the way to something beyond themselves. The horned altars of Jericho stand at the center of an archaeological debate as heated as the desert sun. Were these stone sentinels stages for blood sacrifice, or silent guardians marking sacred boundaries? The evidence tantalizes with contradictions. Take the altar discovered near the western gate, its surface scarred by shallow channels that converge toward a central depression. Biochemical analysis revealed traces of animal fats embedded deep in the stone, undeniable proof of repeated offerings. Yet 3 paces away, a nearly identical altar bears no such stains, its corners worn smooth only by the touch of countless hands over centuries. This duality fuels scholarly divisions. One camp points to altars found with flint knives still resting at their bases, blades darkened by oxidized iron. They argue the horn design served a practical function, anchoring sacrificial animals during rituals, with the upward curving projections preventing struggling creatures from tumbling off. Ancient Near Eastern texts from later periods describe similar, binding horns in temple rites, but skeptics counter with discoveries like the group of miniature horned altars arranged in a perfect square around Jericho's oldest spring, too small for sacrifice, yet positioned like sentinels guarding a sacred space. These might have marked zones where the divine and mortal worlds intersected, their horns symbolizing not slaughter but protection, like the upturned tusks guarding city gates. The controversy deepens when examining wear patterns. Some altars show erosion concentrated on their eastern sides, suggesting generations of worshippers faced a particular direction during ceremonies, perhaps toward rising celestial bodies. Others exhibit polished horns but untouched surfaces, as if only the projections held ritual significance. A groundbreaking isotope analysis recently revealed that one altar's stains came not from domesticated animals but wild ibex, animals sacred across the region. Did this altar host rare, potent ceremonies while others served daily veneration? Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from an altar found deliberately shattered and buried beneath a new dwelling. Its fragments were arranged with care, the horns pointing northward, surrounded by 12 smooth stones. This intentional destruction mirrors later biblical accounts of decommissioning pagan altars, hinting at shifting beliefs within Jericho itself. Whether stages for sacrifice or stones of covenant, these altars defy simple categorization. They stand as testament to a spiritual world where boundaries between life and death, practical and symbolic, were as fluid as the smoke that once rose between their horns. Barely larger than a coin but resonating with a sound that once pierced the solemnity of Jericho's sacred spaces, the bronze symbols uncovered by archaeologists seem almost too delicate to have carried spiritual weight until you hear their sharp, shimmering clang. These matched pairs, each no wider than a thumb's length, were crafted with tapered edges to produce a high, ringing pitch when struck together, their vibrations cutting through the murmur of rituals like a divine interruption. Held between finger and thumb, their handles worn smooth from use, they offer a tangible connection to the ecstatic soundscapes of ancient worship. The parallels to biblical descriptions are striking. Centuries after these symbols fell silent, the Book of Psalms would exhort believers to praise Him with the clash of cymbals, suggesting a continuity of sacred music across millennia. One particularly well-preserved set, discovered near a stepped platform believed to be a ritual dance area, still bears microscopic traces of textile fibers, likely from the tassels of a ceremonial garment that brushed against them during processions. Their sound profile, recreated using metallurgical analysis, matches the zil mentioned in later Canaanite texts as instruments for summoning divine presence. But these weren't mere noisemakers. The bronze used a mix of copper and tin with trace arsenic, was alloyed precisely to produce a tone that decays slowly, creating an almost hypnotic sustain. When played in tandem with drums or bone flutes also found at the site, the effect would have been transcendent, a sonic tapestry designed to elevate participants beyond the mundane. One cymbal pair, unearthed beside a cache of hallucinogenic henbane seeds, hints at their role in trance-inducing ceremonies, their metallic shimmer guiding worshippers toward altered states. Yet the most poignant detail lies in their imperfections. Unlike the flawless symbols of later temple treasuries, Jericho's examples show uneven hammer marks and patched cracks, evidence of local artisans working with what they had. One even bears a child's tiny fingerprints pressed into the handle's soft wax mold before firing, suggesting the sacred and the everyday were never truly separate. To clash them today is to hear an echo of Bronze Age rapture, a sound that once bridged earth and heavens, now reduced to a whisper across time. Tucked into the corners of Jericho's ancient homes, terracotta shrines the size of breadboxes reveal a spirituality woven into the fabric of daily life. These weren't grand temple replicas but intimate, crumbly walled chapels hand-molded from local clay, their interiors often lined with flecks of mica to catch the flicker of oil lamps. Picture lifting the roof off one. Inside, a weathered figurine of a goddess stands guard over miniature offering trays still holding petrified crumbs of bread, dried figs reduced to dust, and the faintest stain of spilled wine at the base. These were stages for private devotion where the divine wasn't distant but as close as the hearth fire. The shrine's designs whisper of routine reverence. Many feature hinged doors, some no taller than a finger, that could be opened at dawn and closed at dusk, framing worship as part of the household's daily rhythm. One particularly touching example, found nestled between grinding stones in a kitchen, had its interior walls blackened by soot, suggesting offerings were made alongside meal preparations. The deity figurines inside vary wildly in style. Some are crude, pinched from clay by untrained hands, while others show astonishing detail, like a seated goddess with braided hair so precise you can count the strands. What's remarkable is how these shrines adapted to domestic spaces. A discovery in a potter's workshop revealed a shrine molded directly into a workbench, its offering tray still holding tiny clay animals, perhaps both devotion and craft samples intermingled. Another, found beneath a child's sleeping mat, contained a palm-sized statue with its face carefully rubbed smooth, as if tiny hands had touched it nightly for comfort. Even the cracks tell stories. One shrine's broken roof had been repaired with bitumen, its fissures filled with crushed malachite to glitter like stars when lamp-lit. But the real magic lies in the offerings themselves. Chromatography analysis on one tray detected traces of saffron, a precious spice that must have traveled hundreds of miles to reach Jericho. Others held fish bones arranged in careful spirals or clusters of mustard seeds, their pungency likely symbolizing prayers for health. A shrine near a birthing room contained a tiny clay womb filled with poppy seeds, its symbolism as clear today as it was 8,000 years ago. These weren't just ritual objects, they were living artifacts, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of fingers tracing the same paths. A mother pressing a fig to a goddess's lips, a craftsman anointing a shrine's threshold with oil, a child leaving a pebble as an offering. The terracotta may have cracked, but the intimacy remains, bridging the gap between then and now with every crumb of charred bread still clinging to those miniature altars. Among the most mesmerizing artifacts unearthed in Jericho are the obsidian mirrors, hand-sized discs of volcanic glass polished to such a flawless sheen they still reflect blurry images after millennia buried in the earth. Unlike the crude metal mirrors of later periods, these Neolithic marvels required hundreds of hours of grinding against sandstone with water and ash, their surfaces smoothed to near molecular perfection. Hold one at the right angle, and your distorted reflection stares back across 8,000 years, a face superimposed over the ghostly visage of whoever last gazed into this black glass in ritual or wonder. The mirror's supernatural associations become clear when examining their context. Several were found interred with individuals whose bones showed deformities, a hunched spine, an elongated skull, physical differences that might have marked them as shamans or seers. One particularly striking discovery placed a mirror in the hands of a burial wearing a headdress of cowrie shells, their placement mimicking eyes, as if the deceased required enhanced vision in the afterlife. The mirrors themselves often bear microscopic scratch patterns radiating from their centers, perhaps from repeated circular wiping during scrying sessions. Residue analysis on one mirror's edge revealed traces of psychoactive henbane, a plant linked to prophetic trances across ancient cultures. But why obsidian? Beyond its reflective qualities, this volcanic glass carried profound symbolic weight. When fractured, its edges are sharper than surgical steel, a duality of surface and substance that might have represented the boundary between seen and unseen worlds. Later Hittite texts describe obsidian as the stone that sees through time, while Mayan civilizations would eventually use similar mirrors for communicating with ancestors. Jericho's mirrors, often framed with bitumen blackened goat leather, amplify this mystique, their darkness reflecting not clear reality but hazy, dreamlike glimpses, perfect for interpreting omens. The craftsmanship reveals layers of meaning. Some mirrors were deliberately slightly convex, warping reflections to emphasize facial features or celestial bodies when angled toward the sky. Others have frosted backs carved with spiral motifs, symbols found in contemporaneous water shrines, linking the mirrors to underground springs and the reflective surfaces of sacred pools. A broken mirror found near a child's grave had been carefully reassembled with tree resin, its cracks filled with powdered azurite to resemble veins of living stone. Were these tools for contacting spirits, symbols of divine vision? The answer may lie in their imperfections. Unlike later bronze mirrors that sought clarity, Jericho's obsidian intentionally distorts, faces elongate, firelight bends into serpentine shapes, the moon's reflection shatters like ice. This wasn't vanity, it was a deliberate manipulation of perception, a way to glimpse the other side of reality's veil. To peer into one today is to participate in an ancient deception, seeing not what is but what might be, just as generations of seekers did when the world was young. Among the most striking ritual vessels from Jericho are the ceramic bulls, potent symbols of divine power molded into containers for sacred offerings. These aren't just decorative, they're vessels of transformation, their hollow bodies designed to hold libations of wine, oil, or blood, their gaping mouths serving as spouts to pour these offerings onto altars or into the earth. Picture the scene, a priest lifting one of these bull-shaped vessels high, its stout legs braced against his palms, the liquid within glugging out through the sculpted muzzle as participants watched the earth drink what the gods had been given. The storm god connection is unmistakable. Across the ancient Near East, bulls embodied raw natural forces, their thunderous stampedes echoing storms, their horns mimicking lightning. In Ugaritic texts, the god bull is called the rider of clouds, often depicted as a bull or with bull iconography. Jericho's vessels mirror this symbolism, their arched necks and muscular shoulders radiating power. Residue analysis confirms their sacred role. One bull vessel still held traces of fermented pomegranate mixed with myrrh, a concoction later associated with storm god rituals in neighboring cultures. Another, found near a cistern, contained crystallized remnants of olive oil and crushed barley, possibly offerings for rain to nourish crops, but what's truly revelatory are the patterns of destruction. Many bull vessels were found deliberately shattered, not by time's wear but by human hands. Reconstruction shows a consistent method. The horns were snapped first, then the legs, finally the body crushed sideways as if ritually killed. A cluster discovered near a granary displayed particularly violent fractures, their pieces mixed with charred wheat kernels, suggesting a ceremony where the vessel's destruction paralleled the death of harvested grain. Others were buried intact but with their spout mouths sealed with clay, as if to contain their power, a practice seen in Hittite rites where vessels were muzzled to restrain divine forces. The bull's craftsmanship deepens the mystery. Some were slip-painted with red ochre, wounds dripping from their shoulders mimicking sacrificial stains. Others had tiny clay birds perched between their horns, perhaps symbolizing messages carried to the heavens. One especially poignant example, found beside a child's burial, was miniaturized to fit small hands, its surface worn smooth from touch, a tactile connection between the living and whatever storm bringer the child's family hoped would guard their journey beyond. These vessels weren't mere containers, they were avatars. When filled, they became conduits for divine presence. When broken, their shards carried echoes of sacred violence, the necessary death that preceded renewal, the storm that both destroyed and nourished. To hold a fragment now is to touch the paradox of ancient faith, the bull that was both victim and god, the vessel that was both tool and sacrifice, the act of breaking that made whole. Slender as a finger yet humming with latent power, the ivory wands of Jericho emerge from the earth as conduits between the human and the divine. Carved from hippopotamus or elephant tusk materials both exotic and perilous to obtain, these polished rods bear intricate spirals, zigzags, and stylized animal processions that seem to writhe under the touch. Unlike mundane tools, their surfaces gleam with an almost unnatural smoothness, worn not by labor but by the grip of hands that wielded them in ceremonies lost to time. The iconography tells a layered story. One particularly well-preserved wand displays a serpent coiling around its shaft, its scales rendered with such precision that running a fingertip along them creates the illusion of movement. Interspersed between the carvings are cup-shaped depressions. Microscopic residue analysis revealed traces of hallucinogenic ointments, suggesting the wand was both a visual and tactile focus during trance rituals. Another, broken near its tip, reveals a hollow core packed with charred remains of juniper berries, their pungent smoke perhaps channeled through the wand like a spiritual conduit. Contextual clues deepen the mystery. Several wands were discovered near plastered skulls, their placement suggesting a role in ancestral rites. One rested atop a skull's forehead, its carved patterns mirroring the painted lines on the plaster below, as if the wand activated or communicated with the enshrined ancestor. Others were buried vertically at thresholds, their pointed ends aimed earthward, possibly to anchor protective energies or seal away malevolent forces. The craftsmanship borders on the impossible. Using only stone tools, artisans achieved carving so minute that some lines are barely visible to the naked eye. A procession of lions no larger than sesame seeds marches along one wand's length. Under ultraviolet light, faint traces of pigment emerge. Red ochre for the lion's manes, azurite for a river symbolized by wavy lines, and bitumen blackening the eyes of etched owls, their gaze seemingly designed to peer into darkness both literal and metaphysical. Who wielded these objects? The wear patterns offer clues. Some show smoother grips at one end, suggesting single-handed use by priests or healers. Others exhibit even erosion, implying they were passed between participants during communal rites. A child-sized wand, its ivory still bearing the faint grooves of milk teeth, was found near a burial site, perhaps a talisman for the afterlife or an heirloom touched by generations before its final resting place. To hold one is to feel the weight of unanswered questions. Were they used to draw invisible protective sigils in the air? To trace the contours of a patient's body during healing rites, or perhaps to conduct the voices of gods during oracle sessions, their carvings serving as a symbolic script for divine messages. The ivory refuses to speak, but its silence echoes with possibilities, each groove and notch a frozen moment in a ritual we can only half imagine. Among the silent stones of Jericho's sacred spaces, the offering tables stand as unassuming yet profound witnesses to rituals long faded from memory. These flat limestone slabs, some no larger than a tray, others spanning the length of a man, bear shallow, bowl-like depressions worn smooth by countless offerings, each one a tactile record of devotion. Run your fingers along the edges and you'll feel the subtle variations. Some basins are deep and narrow, others wide and shallow, their shapes hinting at the diversity of gifts once placed upon them. The debate over what these tables held is as layered as the sediment surrounding them. One table, discovered near a spring, still cradled a residue of oxidized copper and barley grains, a mixture later texts associate with purification rites. Another, found shattered near an altar, bore dark stains in its central depression that spectroscopy identified as animal fats, likely from sacrificial offerings. But perhaps most intriguing are the tables with multiple small indentations, arranged in precise patterns resembling constellations. These held no organic traces at all, leading some scholars to argue they cradled sacred stones or tokens during divination ceremonies. Context adds further complexity. Several tables were positioned at the convergence of water channels, their surfaces angled to allow liquids to trickle into collecting vessels below, a possible prototype for later libation systems in grander temples. Others stood in pairs flanking doorways, their depressions aligned to hold identical offerings, as if creating a symbolic threshold between worlds. One particularly enigmatic slab had 7 depressions, each stained a different hue, ochre red, malachite green, and lapis blue, suggesting offerings tied to celestial bodies or layered cosmologies. Yet the most haunting clues come from wear patterns. The edges of some tables are polished to a high sheen, not from cleaning, but from countless hands brushing against them in repetitive motions, perhaps anointing objects or sweeping offerings into fire pits. A child-sized table, its surface pocked with tiny finger marks, was found near a residential quarter, its depressions filled with chickpeas and lentils, the humble meals of everyday folk transformed into sacred gifts. Were these tables altars for the people, where even the poorest could present a handful of grain, stages for blood rites that bound the community to the divine? Or perhaps ancient accounting systems, their depressions tallying offerings owed or received. The stones refuse to yield a single answer, but in their silent basins we find echoes of a truth more universal than any ritual: the human need to give, to connect, to lay something of ourselves before the unknown and whisper, "Take this and remember me." Glowing like fragments of a turquoise sky fallen to earth, the faience amulets of Jericho pulse with an otherworldly hue. Their Egyptian blue-green glaze still vibrant after millennia buried in the dust. These tiny talismans, some no larger than a thumbnail, depict the dwarf god Bes with his lion's mane and protruding tongue, his grotesque yet protective visage watching over the living and the dead alike. Their presence in Jericho speaks not just of faith, but of vast trade networks stretching across the ancient Near East, connecting the Jordan Valley to the banks of the Nile through routes paved with incense, copper, and sacred objects. The material itself tells a story of cultural exchange. Faience, a ceramic-like paste of crushed quartz, copper compounds, and alkaline glaze, was an Egyptian innovation, its recipe guarded so closely that finding these amulets in Jericho implies either direct trade or skilled local imitation. Scientific analysis reveals fascinating details. Some amulets contain trace elements matching Nilotic clay deposits, confirming their Egyptian origin, while others use local sands with near-identical glazing techniques, suggesting Jericho's artisans mastered the process themselves. One particularly exquisite Bes amulet, discovered near a merchant's dwelling, still has flecks of gold leaf clinging to its mane, a luxury enhancement proving its owner's wealth and devotion. But why Bes, this seemingly bizarre deity, often depicted grinning with his tongue out and knife in hand, was Egypt's protector of households, childbirth, and sleep. His appearance in Jericho hints at shared fears and hopes, amulets like these were commonly sewn into children's clothing or hung above beds to ward off nightmares and infant mortality. A cluster found near a residential quarter showed where patterns indicating they'd been suspended from cords, their surfaces polished smooth from years of anxious fingering during dark nights. Another, buried beneath a threshold, had its back inscribed with a spiral pattern identical to Canaanite protective symbols, a cultural fusion where Egyptian and local beliefs intertwined. The trade routes that brought these amulets to Jericho read like an ancient map of interconnected spirituality. Copper from Timnah, the closest source to Jericho, was exchanged down the King's Highway for Egyptian faience and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. A merchant's ledger scrap found at the site lists 10 blue shems, likely amulets traded for 2 measures of balsam, Jericho's famed resin, prized in Egyptian embalming. The amulets' distribution patterns are equally telling. Most appear near workshops or elite dwellings, but a few cruder examples emerge in poorer quarters, suggesting even modest households scraped together goods for these potent protectors. What's most striking is their endurance. While fashions in pottery and weapons shifted over centuries, Bes amulets remained virtually unchanged. Their formulaic designs are testament to the timeless human need for security against the unseen. One amulet found clutched in a skeletal hand had been repaired twice, its broken edges drilled with tiny holes and restrung, as if its owner couldn't bear to part with its power. To hold one today is to grasp the paradox of ancient globalization, a mass-produced object yet deeply personal, foreign in origin yet intimate in function. A vivid blue whisper across deserts and millennia that says you are not alone in the dark. From the palm-sized clay hollows of Jericho's ruins come sounds that defy time. Bird whistles, their delicate beaks still poised to release trills that once pierced ceremonial silences. These aren't children's toys, they're meticulously crafted instruments, each one shaped like doves, falcons, or birds too stylized to name. Their tail feathers flared to channel breath into precise, piercing notes. Blow into one today, and the sound that emerges is uncanny, not a human imitation of birdsong, but something eerily between melody and omen, a noise that would have raised hairs on Neolithic necks. The craftsmanship reveals sacred intent. Unlike utilitarian pottery, these whistles were fired at higher temperatures, their clay mixed with crushed shell to produce a brighter, sharper tone. Some bear fingerprints preserved in the wet clay where the artisan pinched the air channel just so. A millimeter's difference meant altering the pitch from a soothing coo to a shrill alarm. Residue inside several whistles suggests they were sometimes filled with liquids water for warbling effects, or perhaps hallucinogenic infusions, their vapors inhaled with each note to blur the lines between music and prophecy. Context deepens the mystery. A cluster of dove whistles was found near a burial site, their sound holes deliberately clogged with bitumen, silenced for interment, perhaps to prevent their calls from disturbing the dead. Others, discovered near grain silos, mimic sparrows, creatures both welcomed as pest controllers and feared as harvest thieves. Their dual symbolism resonates in later Levantine texts where bird calls were considered divine messages. A sparrow's chirp might signal coming abundance, while a falcon's cry could warn of drought. Most haunting are the whistles designed for 2 hands. These elaborate pieces feature multiple chambers, allowing a single breath to produce cascading notes reminiscent of flock movements. One discovered near a ritual platform still bears ochre stains around its mouthpiece, lip paint from generations of players, their collective breath still echoing in the clay. To press your lips where theirs once were is to taste the faintest tang of ancient earth and understand. These weren't instruments but voice throwers, shaping human breath into something otherworldly, a sound to knit the skies to earth. Rising above the crowds of ancient Jericho, bronze crescent standards would have glinted in the torchlight during sacred processions, their curved blades catching fire like the moon itself descending to walk among mortals. These weren't mere decorations, they were sacred emblems, their forms echoing the lunar cycle worshipped across Mesopotamia as the domain of Sin, the moon god whose silver light governed tides, harvests, and the passage of time. Picture the scene, priests bearing these crescent-topped poles aloft, their slow march through the city casting rippling shadows, the metal's resonance humming with each step as if channeling celestial music. The craftsmanship of these standards reveals their divine purpose. Unlike utilitarian bronze tools, the crescents were cast using lost wax techniques to achieve razor-thin edges that shimmered even in faint light, deliberately mimicking the moon's delicate crescent phase. One particularly well-preserved example, discovered near a gate shrine, still bears traces of silver plating along its inner curve, a metallurgical feat requiring mercury gilding, a technique thought to have originated centuries later. The hollow poles they mounted onto contained tiny bronze pellets, creating a soft, rain-like rattle during movement, an auditory symbol of the moon's association with night dew and fertility. Contextual clues paint a vivid picture of their ritual use. A fresco fragment from a nearby site depicts a procession where similar crescents are carried alongside models of bulls and sheaves of grain, suggesting ceremonies tied to agricultural cycles. In Jericho itself, where patterns on the standard's mounting brackets indicate they were lifted and tilted rhythmically, perhaps to animate the crescents as living representations of the moon's journey. One standard's base was found embedded with date palm pollen, a direct link to lunar festivals timed with pollination seasons when the moon's phases dictated optimal harvest rituals. But these objects weren't just symbols, they were thresholds. The crescent's horns, often sharpened to a startling precision, served a dual purpose. Later texts from Mari describe similar standards being used to ritually open ceremonial spaces, their points drawing invisible boundaries in the air to demarcate sacred ground. In Jericho, several crescents were discovered flanking altars, their orientation matching lunar standstills, those moments when the moon appears to pause in the sky. During these celestial events, the shadows cast by the standards would have stretched toward altars like pointing fingers, aligning earthly worship with cosmic rhythms. The most haunting discovery came from a collapsed shrine where a crescent standard lay across the skeleton of a young ibex, its horns mirroring the bronze shape above. Carbon dating revealed both objects were interred during a total lunar eclipse, a phenomenon ancient observers might have interpreted as the moon god's temporary death. Here, the standard wasn't just a ritual tool, it became a participant in the drama, its gleaming surface perhaps anointed with sacrificial oil to relight the darkened moon. To stand beside one today is to feel the weight of celestial time, not as an abstract concept but as a living force these ancient worshippers held literally in their hands. The crescents didn't just represent the moon, they harnessed its mystique, turning processions into moving constellations, every rattle and glint a carefully orchestrated dialogue between earth and sky. Their silent curves still whisper of nights when the whole city walked in step with the heavens, bronze moons swaying above them like promises of renewal written in metal and fire. The rhythm of life in ancient Jericho pulsed not to the steady march of the sun, but to the silver cadence of the moon, its waxing and waning etched into the very bones of the city. Archaeologists have uncovered shrine foundations aligned with uncanny precision to lunar standstills, their doorways framing the rising moon during its most extreme northern and southern positions in the sky. One such structure, dubbed the Horned Moon Shrine for its crescent-shaped altar, contains a sightline that bisects two stone pillars only during the winter solstice full moon, when moonlight would have flooded the chamber to illuminate a fresco of star clusters now faded to ghosts. This lunar obsession permeated daily life. Cuneiform tablets from neighboring cities referenced Jericho's famed moon orchards, date palms planted in spiraling patterns that mirrored the moon's phases, their pollination rituals timed to lunar cycles. Farmers didn't sow seeds by seasonal rains alone. but by the moon's quarter phases, a practice preserved in fragmentary clay almanacs found near granaries. Even domestic rituals bowed to this celestial clock. Storage jars excavated from household courtyards bear wax crescents smeared near their rims, likely applied during new moons to safeguard provisions until the next sliver appeared. The moon's dual nature, a gentle luminary and chaotic force, manifested in Jericho's artifacts. Bronze-tied tablets found near springs track lunar cycles alongside water salinity levels, proving the city's priests understood the moon's pull on underground aquifers centuries before Hellenistic scientists proposed tidal theories. Yet this reverence held darker dimensions. A cache of lunar eclipse omens inscribed on sheep scapulae warns of the moon's blood, a reference to total eclipses when the moon appears copper-red. During these events, excavations reveal hastily constructed eye eclipse altars layered with shattered blue faience symbolizing the absent moon, and sacrificed white goats, their hides mimicking moonlight. Most haunting are the mortuary connections. Jericho's second-story burials, corpses interred in home walls overwhelmingly face northwest, aligning with the moon's most frequent setting position. Infant graves frequently contain mother-of-pearl crescents placed over the left eye, perhaps a plea for lunar rebirth. One aristocratic tomb featured a ceiling painted with 295 dots, the exact number of days in 10 lunar months, suggesting the deceased's lifespan was measured not in years but in moons. This lunar tapestry didn't exist in isolation. Jericho's moon cult shared striking parallels with the worship of Sin at and Yarek at Ugarit, yet diverged in crucial ways. Unlike those distant temples where the moon was anthropomorphized as a bearded god, Jericho's oldest shrines depict the moon as an impersonal force, a spiral, a horned bull, or a boat navigating the night sky. Only during the Bronze Age do humanoid moon deities appear, and even then they're always veiled, their faces obscured by crescent-shaped hoods. This shift mirrors broader changes as Jericho grew from a Neolithic village to a fortified city. Its moon worship became increasingly institutionalized, its mysteries guarded by priestly elites rather than celebrated communally. The moon's ultimate victory over Jericho's imagination lies in its sheer persistence. Long after Egyptian sun worship and Canaanite storm gods influenced the region, lunar symbols dominated household amulets and boundary markers. Even the city's final destruction layer, a charred stratum marking its Bronze Age collapse, contains a lone, unbroken lunar standard leaning against a toppled wall, its bronze crescent still glinting defiantly at the sky, as if awaiting the next phase to begin. The anthropomorphic vessels of Jericho stand at the uncanny intersection of utility and veneration, clay jars with swollen bellies designed to hold precious oils or grains, yet crowned with humanoid faces whose hollow eyes seem to peer into realms beyond. These aren't mere containers, they're sculptures imbued with presence, their spouts emerging from parted lips as if the vessel itself might speak. Picture pouring wine into one. The liquid would vanish into a mouth frozen in eternal reception, the act transforming a simple offering into something disturbingly intimate, like feeding a silent god. Their designs blur the line between object and entity. Some have broad, genderless faces with pinched noses and incised pupils, their features simplified yet hauntingly expressive. Others show startling individuality, a crooked smile here, a furrowed brow there, as if modeled after specific elders or revered ancestors. One particularly arresting example, found near a communal granary, has fingerprints pressed into the clay around its neck, suggesting the artist shaped the face while cradling the vessel like a child. The firing process only deepened this illusion. Heat caused minor cracks around the eyes and mouth, giving some jars the unsettling appearance of weeping or whispering as the clay cooled. Context reveals their sacred role. Residue analyses tell of specialty contents, myrrh-infused oils in vessels buried near altars, fermented honey in those interred with the dead. A cluster discovered beneath a shrine's threshold still held barley mixed with powdered lapis lazuli, a costly blue stone linked to divinity. The placement of these vessels is equally telling. Unlike ordinary storage jars tucked into corners, anthropomorphic vessels often occupied central positions perched on ledges where flickering lamplight would animate their features, or buried upright at crossroads with their faces peering toward paths of approach. One broken specimen was found cradling a handful of snail shells, their spiral forms mirroring the curls of hair etched into the vessel's scalp, a deliberate pairing of earthly and cosmic symbolism. But the true genius lies in their functionality. These weren't static idols, they were designed for interaction. The best preserved examples show where hands repeatedly grasped their shoulders to tip offerings, the clay polished smooth from generations of ritual touch. Spouts vary dramatically, some wide for rapid pouring during communal feasts, others as narrow as reeds for drop-by-drop libations meant to prolong the sacred moment. A vessel shaped like a pregnant woman even channels liquid through hidden channels in its belly, releasing liquid from between its legs in a startling metaphor of birth and abundance. Who or what did these vessels embody? The lack of inscriptions leaves room for debate. Their stout, maternal forms align with Neolithic earth goddess depictions, yet the occasional bearded face suggests ancestral spirits. A discovery near Jericho's springs adds another layer, a vessel with fish scale patterns carved into its cheeks, its spout shaped like a waterfowl's beak, implying personification of the life-giving waters themselves. What's undeniable is their power to unsettle even modern viewers. To pour into one today is to feel the weight of ancient eyes upon you, to confront the visceral belief that every drop swallowed by that clay throat was received not by an object but by something alive, watching, and infinitely thirsty. Beneath the foundations of Jericho's granaries and pressed into the thresholds of its oldest homes, flint sickles lie untouched by harvest labor, their razor-sharp blades too pristine to have ever sliced a stalk of grain. These aren't farming tools, they're ceremonial objects crafted with the same meticulous care as temple offerings, yet never subjected to the wear of daily use. Picture holding one. The serrated edge glints like a row of miniature lightning bolts, the curved bone handle polished smooth not from labor, but from generations of anointing with oils during planting rites. These sickles were never meant to cut wheat, they were meant to cut deals with the divine, ensuring the earth would yield its bounty season after season. The evidence of their sacred role is etched into every detail. Unlike utilitarian sickles found in fields, these ritual versions were made from translucent, honey-colored flint sourced from quarries miles away, material chosen for its luminosity in sunlight, not durability. Their teeth are uniformly spaced with mathematical precision, some even inlaid with bitumen, veins that shimmer like water when struck by dawn light. Microscopic analysis reveals traces of red ochre packed into the serrations, a deliberate act likely tied to blood symbolism, as if the sickle itself bled in place of the crops it protected. One cache discovered beneath a silo contained 7 sickles arranged in a radiating pattern, their handles pointing toward the rising sun at summer solstice, a silent prayer for solar favor when the grain stood tallest. But why bury them? The placement of these caches tells its own story. Many cluster near water channels or beneath storage pits, spaces where the threat of rot or pests loomed largest. A set of 3 sickles found encircling a clay model of a granary suggests they functioned as apotropaic guardians, their sharp edges symbolically warding off hunger and decay. Others were interred with their blades deliberately snapped, not by accident, but in a ritual act of killing the tool to release its power into the soil. One particularly poignant discovery revealed a child's burial cradling a miniature flint sickle, its handle carved with sprouting grain motifs, a heartbreaking hope for rebirth in lean times. The connection to agricultural deities is inescapable. Later Canaanite texts describe the god Dagon wielding a golden sickle to bless the fields, while Mesopotamian cylinder seals show goddesses crowned with crescent-shaped blades. Jericho's sickles predate these depictions by millennia, yet their form, a curved blade mirroring the moon's phases, hints at an early link between lunar cycles and harvest rituals. Some sickles even bear faint carvings of pregnant animals along their handles, blending symbols of fertility with the act of reaping. What's most striking is how these objects transcend their material. A flint sickle could sever a stalk with one clean stroke, yet these were never tested against straw. Their power lay in potential, in the promise of sharpness held in reserve like the unspent seed grain saved for next year's planting. To unearth one today is to hold a contract between humanity and the earth, written not on clay but in stone and intention. Keep our blades idle and let the land provide. The silence of these unused edges speaks louder than any harvest song. Hidden in the cracks of Jericho's walls and coiled around the bases of its oldest graves, stone serpents lie in wait, their smooth, sinuous bodies carved from limestone so precisely that the scales seem to ripple under your fingertips. These aren't mere decorations, they're sentinels, their hollow eyes and parted jaws frozen in silent warning. Unlike the bronze snakes we've seen before, these stone effigies are rooted in place, often wedged into doorjambs or half buried at burial sites, as if anchoring their power to the very bones of the city. The craftsmanship reveals their sacred purpose. Each snake is unique. Some are thick-bodied with diamond-shaped heads reminiscent of vipers, others slender and undulating like grass snakes. The most striking feature is their mouths. Many are carved with a slight gap, as if caught mid-hiss, and microscopic analysis shows traces of red ochre packed into these crevices, making the jaws appear to drip with blood or flame. One particularly chilling example, found encircling a child's burial, has its tail wrapped around its own neck in an eternal loop, a symbol scholars link to later Ouroboros motifs representing cyclical eternity. Context confirms their apotropaic role. These snakes cluster where danger was believed to lurk, thresholds where evil spirits might enter, storage pits guarding precious grain, and graves marking the boundary between the living and the dead. A pair of entwined serpents discovered flanking a household shrine's entrance still bears soot stains from oil lamps placed between them, the flickering light bringing their carved scales to life to watch over the space. Another, buried beneath a merchant's strongbox, has its belly hollowed into a tiny compartment that once held a single wolf's tooth, a layered charm combining the snake's vigilance with the predator's ferocity. But why snakes? The answer lies in their dual symbolism. Across the ancient Near East, serpents represented both death and rebirth. Their venom could kill, yet their ability to shed skin mirrored renewal. In Jericho, their presence at graves might have been less about guarding the dead than guiding them, their coiled forms serving as maps for the soul's underworld journey. Later Hittite and Canaanite myths describe serpent deities as psychopomps, and a striking parallel emerges in Jericho's burials. Several effigies were positioned to align with the setting sun during equinoxes, their shadows stretching toward the deceased like pathways. The materials whisper of deeper meanings. While most effigies use local limestone, a rare few are carved from black basalt imported from distant volcanic regions. These darker snakes often guard water sources, their glossy surfaces mimicking the reflective quality of pooled water, a clever visual metaphor tying the creature to life-giving springs. One basalt serpent found near a cistern has its tail carved into a spiral resembling a whirlpool, as if to embody the water's hidden currents. The most unsettling discovery came from a collapsed gatehouse where a massive stone serpent lay crushed beneath fallen bricks. Its body had been deliberately broken into 7 segments before burial, each piece rubbed with bitter herbs. Nearby tablets reference a 7-fold serpent myth, possibly a precursor to the later chaos dragons like Lotan or Leviathan. This wasn't just a protective charm, it was a ritual dismantling of chaos itself, the broken pieces buried to neutralize their power. To touch one now is to feel the paradox of ancient fear and reverence. These stone snakes didn't just ward off evil, they embodied it, harnessed it. Their frozen strikes a perpetual reminder that the line between protector and destroyer was as thin as a serpent's spine. In their coiled vigilance, Jericho's people found a way to stare into the darkness and whisper, "We see you watching. We've made you stone." Among the humblest yet most revealing artifacts from ancient Jericho are the clay loom weights, dense, palm-sized objects that once anchored vertical warp threads on wooden looms. But these aren't just utilitarian tools. Many bear intricate stamped symbols, crescent moons, stylized goddess figures, or branching trees, marking them as vessels of meaning as much as function. Picture the scene, rows of these weights dangling like sacred pendants beneath a loom, their stamped designs hidden from casual view but known to the weaver, turning each tug of the thread into a silent invocation. The connection to goddess worship is etched into the clay. A cluster of loom weights discovered near a household shrine all bear the same seal, a schematic figure with upraised arms, echoing later depictions of Asherah, the Canaanite mother goddess associated with fertility and craftsmanship. Residue analysis revealed traces of olive oil on their surfaces, suggesting they were periodically anointed during weaving sessions, blurring the line between chore and ritual. One particularly striking weight, found still tied to a fragment of linen thread, shows a serpent coiled around a branch, a potent symbol of renewal that mirrors motifs in contemporaneous temple art. Yet the economic dimension is equally compelling. Some weights stamped with identical symbols were found scattered across different households, hinting at centralized production under temple oversight. Imagine a system where sacred iconography doubled as quality control. Weights bearing the moon, symbol of a particular deity, might certify cloth destined for priestly vestments or temple hangings. A broken ledger tablet nearby lists 20 weights of the lady's mark exchanged for grain, suggesting these objects weren't just tools but currency in a devotional economy. The weight's physicality tells its own story. Their standardized heft, each averaging around 300 grams, allowed for consistent fabric tension, but the choice of material speaks volumes. Unlike stone weights used elsewhere, Jericho's were crafted from clay mixed with crushed pottery from earlier layers of the city, as if weaving the past literally into the fabric of daily life. Some bear tiny fingerprints along their edges, pressed into the wet clay by the makers, while others show grooves from threads worn deep over years of use. What emerges is a portrait of interconnectedness, the sacred and the practical, the economic and the spiritual, all suspended from those unassuming clay discs. To hold one now is to feel the weight of unseen labor, the hands that shaped them, the weavers who prayed with them, the looms that hummed with their motion, producing not just cloth but a tapestry of belief that wrapped Jericho's people from birth to burial. Buried at the heart of Jericho's oldest shrines, copper axe heads gleam with an unsettling perfection. Their razor-sharp edges untouched by wood or warfare, their polished surfaces too pristine to have ever swung in anger or labor. These weren't tools, they were offerings, frozen in a state of perpetual readiness, their lethal potential surrendered to the divine. Picture the moment when one was laid upon an altar, the weight of untested metal pressing into the stone, the flicker of torchlight catching its burnished surface, the unspoken understanding that this object would never fulfill its earthly purpose because its true work belonged to the gods. The craftsmanship of these votive axes reveals their sacred intent. Unlike utilitarian axes worn down by chopping or battle, these were cast using pure copper from distant mines in Wadi Fainan, their alloy deliberately left unhardened to prevent practical use. Their proportions are almost ceremonial, blades wider than necessary, hafting holes too small for sturdy handles, as if designed to be admired rather than wielded. One particularly striking example, found beneath the foundation of a gate shrine, bears an inlaid spiral motif along its blade, the copper channels filled with crushed malachite to glow green like the first shoots of spring. Another, discovered nestled beside a plastered skull, has its edge intentionally blunted in a ritual killing, a practice seen in later Hittite and Canaanite traditions where weapons were symbolically decommissioned to honor the dead. But why axes? The answer lies in their dual symbolism. Across the ancient Near East, axes represented both destruction and covenant. Their blades could clear forests for new life or sever ties between enemies. In Jericho, their deposition often coincides with pivotal moments. A cache buried when the city walls were expanded, another placed near a treaty seal with neighboring tribes. One axe head, still wrapped in linen inside a clay pouch, was inscribed with a single cuneiform wedge, the earliest symbol for oath, suggesting these objects anchored solemn pledges between humans and deities. The context of their discovery paints a vivid picture of ritual theater. Several axes were arranged in geometric patterns, circles representing cyclical time, radiating lines mimicking sunbeams, their placements aligning with solstice sunrises. Others were found embedded in platforms where they would have been visible but unreachable, their gleaming surfaces visible to worshippers but untouchable, a metaphor for divine power held in suspension. A broken axe head discovered near a spring had been deliberately snapped after casting, its pieces buried upstream and downstream, a literal and symbolic bracketing of sacred waters. Perhaps most poignant are the miniature axes, no larger than thumbnails, found in household niches and children's burials. These tiny replicas, some threaded onto cords as amulets, distill the object's essence, not violence but the promise of protection, a divine edge hovering at the periphery of daily life. To hold one today is to grasp the paradox of these offerings. Their forms whisper of strength, yet their fate speaks of surrender, blades never meant to cut anything but the veil between worlds. Among Jericho's most exquisite treasures are the alabaster perfume bottles, translucent vessels so finely carved that sunlight passes through their walls like liquid. These weren't mere vanity items, they were sacred dispensers designed to hold oils so precious they were reserved for anointing priests, statues, and perhaps even the city's legendary walls. Picture one cradled in your palm, cool to the touch, its surface striated with the ghostly veins of the mineral it was hewn from, the stopper still faintly sticky with resin that sealed its contents 8,000 years ago. The craftsmanship defies belief. Using nothing but stone tools and abrasive sands, artisans hollowed out these bottles through narrow neck openings, some no wider than a straw. The thinnest examples are barely thicker than an eggshell, yet they withstand pressure without cracking, a testament to alabaster's unique properties. One particularly stunning specimen, discovered near a shrine's altar, features a stopper carved in the shape of a dove's head, its beak forming the pour spout. When tilted, the oil would have emerged as if from the bird's mouth, a poetic touch blending utility and reverence. But what brews did these bottles contain? Residue analyzers reveal a sensory palette lost to time. Some held spikenard, a musky oil so costly that later biblical texts priced it at a laborer's annual wages. Others preserved traces of frankincense mixed with locally pressed balm of Gilead, creating a scent profile simultaneously earthy and celestial. One broken bottle found in a priestly burial still exuded faint notes of cinnamon and myrrh, a combination ancient texts associate with rites of divine communion. The most surprising discovery came from a cluster of miniature bottles buried beneath a temple threshold. Their interiors coated with a microscopic layer of opopanax, a rare gum resin that produces a narcotic fragrance when heated, possibly used to induce trance states during oracles. The ritual choreography becomes clear when examining wear patterns. Many bottles show polish marks along one side, indicating they were passed in clockwise circles during ceremonies, perhaps to diffuse scent or symbolize cosmic cycles. Others bear thumb-sized depressions near their bases, showing where priests gripped them during anointing, their oils applied to foreheads, idols, or even doorposts as protective acts. A bottle discovered upright in a ceremonial pit had its interior stained blue from prolonged contact with lapis lazuli powder, suggesting its contents were considered as radiant as the heavens themselves. Cultural parallels deepen the mystery. Similar vessels appear in Egyptian tombs and Mesopotamian temple inventories, but Jericho's examples stand out for their intimate scale. These weren't monuments to royal vanity, they were tools of tactile devotion. Some still carry fingerprints in the alabaster's patina, the walls of the perfumer who filled them, the sweat of the priest who carried them, the desperate press of a supplicant's hands during crisis. To hold one now is to bridge the gap between then and now through sense primal power, the understanding that holiness could be poured, that the divine might smell of crushed flowers and sacred smoke, and that a fragile bottle could outlast empires by carrying not just oil but hope itself. Standing in eerie silence along the edges of Jericho's sacred spaces, rows of clay pillar figurines rise like a spectral audience, their cylindrical bodies featureless except for pinched faces that seem to emerge from the clay itself. These aren't idols of gods, but something far more enigmatic. Stylized human forms with elongated necks and hollow eyes, their expressions frozen between supplication and watchfulness. Picture running your fingers over the rough texture of the unadorned body, contrasting with the startling delicacy of the face, where thumbs pressed into wet clay millennia ago to create nostrils, a brow line, the faintest suggestion of lips. These figurines don't tower over worshippers, they stand at knee height, meeting the eyes of those who knelt to pray, creating an unsettling sense of communion between the living and these silent witnesses. The mystery deepens when examining their construction. Each figurine was coil-built, rolled clay stacked and smoothed into slender pillars, but the faces were molded separately and attached with such precision that the seams are nearly invisible. Some show traces of pigment, red ochre brushed across the cheeks, black bitumen outlining the eyes as if to animate their gaze. Unlike the exaggerated fertility goddess figurines found nearby, these forms are deliberately abstract, their genderless bodies devoid of ornamentation. Yet their placement speaks volumes. A cluster discovered near an altar still bears soot stains on their backs, suggesting they faced ritual fires during ceremonies, their featureless bodies absorbing heat and light while their faces remained in shadow. Archaeologists clash over their purpose. One theory suggests they represent ancestral spirits, simplified stand-ins for the dead, allowing their presence at offerings without the complexity of portraiture. Another posits they're ritual puppets, their blank bodies serving as literal vessels temporarily inhabited by deities during ceremonies. The most provocative hypothesis comes from their distribution. They appear exclusively in liminal spaces, doorways, shrine thresholds, and burial boundaries, as if marking transitions between worlds. One figurine found buried beneath a courtyard had its face deliberately turned toward the earth, its hollow head filled with barley seeds that sprouted posthumously, weaving the figurine's hair with living grain. The most haunting details emerge under magnification. Tiny fingerprints on several figurines' torsos match the handprints of children found on household pottery, suggesting young hands participated in their shaping. Another's neck shows repetitive scratch marks, not accidental damage, but precise incisions that analysis revealed once held strands of human hair, perhaps offerings from devotees. A broken figurine's interior contained a single carnelian bead lodged near where a heart would be, a secret offering sealed away by the maker. What lingers isn't just their strangeness, but their intimacy. These weren't distant idols, they were participants. Their clustered arrangements suggest collective witness, rows of silent figures, observing sacrifices or vows. Their worn bases indicate they were moved frequently, perhaps carried in processions or passed hand to hand during rites, and their faces, though crude, harbor an uncanny presence, tilted slightly upward as if awaiting revelation, their empty eyes somehow still holding the weight of 8,000 years of unanswered prayers. To stand among them is to feel the gaze of the unseen, to stand at the edge of a circle where every figure is both guardian and petitioner. Their mute forms a bridge between what we know and what we dare to invoke. These 30 ritual objects don't just tell the story of Jericho, they shatter the notion of it as an isolated Neolithic village and reveal it instead as a spiritual crossroads, a place where Canaanite earth rituals collided with Egyptian amulets and Mesopotamian moon worship. Think about that. A city so ancient it predates the pyramids was already a melting pot of divine ideas. The plastered skulls whisper of ancestor cults rooted deep in local soil, while the faience bes amulets and alabaster perfume bottles scream of trade routes stretching to the Nile. Over here, a bronze crescent standard mirrors lunar veneration from Over there, a serpent effigy coils with symbolism shared by Hittites and Hebrews alike. This wasn't just a city, it was a living mosaic of belief, where every imported object and homegrown tradition wove together into something greater than the sum of its parts. What's staggering isn't simply the diversity, but how seamlessly these influences merged. The horned altars aren't crude copies of Mesopotamian ziggurats, they're reinterpretations, their curves adapted to local libations. The ivory wands borrow Egyptian craftsmanship but carve stories of Levantine spirits. Even the humble loom weights stamped with Asherah's sigil reveal a theology stitched together from neighboring myth yet distinctly Jericho's own. This city didn't passively absorb outside ideas, it metabolized them, transforming foreign symbols into tools for its own spiritual language. Consider the implications. Long before empires rose, before writing standardized myths, Jericho's people were already engaged in a silent dialogue with distant cultures. A merchant might haggle for lapis lazuli under the shadow of Canaanite temples, then pour wine from an Anatolian-style vessel onto a lunar altar while wearing a Nile god's amulet. The rituals enacted here, whether with flint sickles never meant to cut grain or obsidian mirrors that reflected more than faces, weren't just local superstitions. They were nodes in a vast, interconnected web of belief stretching across the ancient world. Yet for every artifact unearthed, 100 questions remain. What sacred texts written on perishable papyrus or leather crumbled to dust in Jericho's humid springs? What wooden idols, what painted tapestries, what whispered prayers left no trace at all? The most tantalizing thought isn't what we've found, but what still lies buried beneath the tell. Perhaps a temple archive, a king's funerary mask, or even a cache of instruments to replicate the very sounds once thought to summon gods. If these 30 objects could rewrite our understanding of Neolithic spirituality, what might the next discovery reveal? Tell us in the comments, what relic do you imagine waiting beneath Jericho's sands, and what secrets might it hold?